name is Tracy Nguyen Mang. I'm the founder and host of the podcast Vietnamese Boat People. So for those of you that are not familiar with the... Thank you. Those are my friends. I'm very honored and just so excited to screen this movie this evening. When I first heard about the film, I heard nails and Vietnamese people, and I was sold. So if you're Vietnamese, you can relate. I grew up with family members in the nail salon industry. My mom owned one growing up. My relatives are still in the business. One of my brothers is actually 20 plus years nail technician. So this movie rung, at my heart for me. And I also think it's a film about the American dream. So I hope that this evening when you watch it, it will touch your heart just as it has touched mine when I first saw it. I'd like to quickly just say a couple of thanks before we forget. We have this evening with us a talented director, Adele Free Pham, all the way in the back. She is donating her film and time to be with us this evening, so we're so grateful. We also want to thank Allison Litcher Joseph, who unfortunately was not feeling well, so had to leave early, but she is an assistant professor here at the New School of Journalism and Design, and thank you to her and the New School for providing this beautiful screening room for us this evening. Thank you so much, and so let's start the film.
Nail salons. They're everywhere. Every city, state, strip mall, uptown, downtown, even Walmart.
When I don't have nails, I feel really naked, like, oh my God, I need my nails.
You got beautiful fingers, you got diamonds on them. I know they look good.
The nail industry is a $7.5 billion industry that focuses just on nails.
And more than half of these salons are Vietnamese.
If you're a Vietnamese American, within 2 degrees of separation, you have somebody working in the nail industry. If not 1 degree, your auntie, your uncle, your relative, your cousin. There's somebody you know.
So we're going to go ahead and start the Q&A portion of this evening. Just to remind you, we are taping it as part of our live podcast taping. At any time, if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll stop in between. So Dow, how are you doing?
I'm great.
Well, you have to turn on.
I'm great.
There we go. There you go. So Adele, you mentioned in the film, so you're half Vietnamese. Your father's Vietnamese. He came over as part of the war refugee, met your mom. And tell us a little bit about your upbringing and what inspired you to make this film.
I'm mixed, so I never felt fully Vietnamese, and I don't speak the language. And I've thought a lot about this, like why the nail salon was so intriguing to me. So, of course, it is finding out why so many Vietnamese people do nails, but also inserting myself in the culture in a certain kind of way. I left home when I was 18, and then I wound up in New York, and New York has less of a Vietnamese population than Oregon even. The largest number of immigrants in Oregon are Vietnamese. So I was losing even more touch with my Vietnamese side while realizing all the feelings of shame about being Vietnamese and a person of color were wrong, kind of understanding that I came up in a world where you were supposed to separate from your immigrant, non-English speaking side and become Americanized. And that was an idea that was just instilled in me in the culture of Portland, Oregon, which is predominantly white. So as I was kind of becoming more woke, I was becoming more separate from my Vietnamese heritage, and this filmmaking is a bridge for me. It's a way to express who I am and kind of represent myself in a way. And I've really been humbled by people's responses to this film, because sometimes it doesn't hit them until they're watching it, that their stories are on screen, that are being nationally broadcast on PBS. And I think people like you and people like me and a lot of second generation Vietnamese, although you're kind of 1.5, are really trying to figure it out, what it all means and what it's going to mean when our parents die.
And in the film, you had some moments where you focused on your dad and your conversations with your dad. So can you talk a little bit about him, and was there significance, or did he have influence in the narration?
Not really. My dad's kind of inscrutable, and his thoughts about Vietnam are very private in a way. So it's always been me digging for answers and trying to make a narrative for him that he didn't express to me growing up, other than some fond memories of growing up in Da Nang before the war. And that's about it. It's a really complicated, painful past. And like a lot of Vietnamese kids, when I started digging, I was like, I don't know if I want to know this whole story. And, it's very real, very raw. And I think I will always be working on that documentary about my father. It hasn't finished yet. So this film is in conversation with that. It's in context with that. Like the very first documentary project I tried to make was following my father going back to Vietnam for the first time. And that's when so much more of my family history from the war was revealed to me. And I still haven't figured out how to contextualize it, how to make it into a film. And when something's really personal and raw and affects your family, it's hard to put that much of yourself out there, I'm very proud of the journey, but it's not as clear-cut as I portrayed it in the film, perhaps. It's more complicated than... He's more complicated than I portrayed him in the film. But again, this is kind of like... Well, I don't know if it was a way to connect with him, but making film is a way to connect my story to my father's, and I'm always trying to do that in some way or another.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like it's an ongoing journey for you.
My family is an ongoing journey for me, for sure. Yeah.
I love the scene where you, Calvin, and his friends at the house, and they're cooking for you, and you're having beers, and it reminded me very much of the Vietnamese men in my life. So did making this film and being very much around them and kind of following the journey with them, how did that connect you to the Vietnamese side?
It gave me a more pleasant experience about being Vietnamese, I think. And, I've watched the film a million times now, and I see that I gravitate towards Vietnamese men. And I analyze that, what is that all about? And I mean, those are the experiences that I had of being Vietnamese growing up, with my father, going to the tributes, going to the reunion, the war reunions and whatnot, and sitting around while he was drinking with his friends. So in a way, Kelvin he's not my father because he's not old enough to be, but he's an older Vietnamese man that I was attracted to and latched on to right away. So there's something similar about him and Bob to my father. And Vietnamese people are funny as hell, and he's funny as hell. And I think that was something that I also needed to experience, that even though he's more generation 1.5 than me, he was also a refugee, we share a very similar humor and silliness, and that's not something that I necessarily got growing up, although I went to school with a bunch of Vietnamese kids and we all hung out and sang karaoke in the basement. So that's been a through line, karaoke.
Yeah, it's in our blood.
It is.
So tell me how you discovered that Tippi Hedren was kind of behind the making of Vietnamese in the nail industry.
It was through NPR. So that NPR, All Things Considered piece, was something that I had listened to. No, I take that back. It was Kim Pham who told me the Tippi Hedren connection. So my very first research interview with her is when I first heard about it, and I was blown away, and then I did a little bit of research and saw, there's actually been a lot of media about her relationship to the first 20 Vietnamese women. But still in the media, it's kind of odd. It's either like, a fairy tale story like Tippi Hedren or the dark side of the nail salon, right? And I was going for something more realistic and true to life. So, it didn't just happen because of Tippi's intervention, but I do often think, well, if these first 20 hadn't been formally trained in manicuring and, she helped place them in different salons, I do wonder if we still would have gotten into this thing or not. And my research says no. And that's what's so interesting about niche trades within an immigrant refugee community. It's like everybody's looking for a job. So especially with Vietnamese people, like they look and copy. And they saw that these women who were well-established in Vietnam, well-respected, were supporting their families off of manicuring. And I really do believe that it took off from there.
Yeah, it's such a pleasant surprise in the story, too, to know someone that famous was part of this whole humanitarian act.
Yeah, it's a bit weird.
Yeah. Does anybody want to ask questions all the way in the back?
I mean, education historically in the Vietnamese culture, it's a part of our culture. It goes back over 1,000 years. So that's something that we're about. Vietnamese people are very industrious. Vietnamese women are very industrious. And imagine surviving a boat journey from a war-torn country to America. And, you're raising children that are speaking perfect English. There's a certain expectation that you're going to use the resources that your parents have provided you to make money to support the family. And, I think that's why not that many of us go into filmmaking. I'm also mixed too, I don't have that Vietnamese mother. It's my father that's pushing me into pharmacy, right? Well, not anymore. So that's always kind of been a conflict in my story. But yeah, your parents there's that respect, that ancestral kind of respect, you have to listen to what your parents do. And that also causes conflict in relationships between Vietnamese parents and their children who, don't fall into line and don't become the doctor that their parents want them to be.
Great question. Yes?
I absolutely love the film. Netflix, iTunes, because I have a whole bunch of friends that I want to.
Well, you can share it with them right now. It's streaming online, but only until June 7th. So if you Google Nailed It and America Reframed or Nailed It Streaming, it'll come up on the World Channel site. Also, I'm Nailed It Doc, D-O-C, on Instagram. So if you forget that and want me to send you the link there, that's the best place to reach me. Thank you, babe.
Nailed it and killed it. I love it. I do want to ask, because you and I chatted last week and you talked about a little bit about how hard it was to find funders and supporters for this film, and that you sort of had to fight through the stereotypes that were existing at the time among Asian nail salons.
Yeah.
So can you just share that with the audience?
Yeah. Still when I watched the film, the health section seems a little forced, but I thought it was necessary to include that information. But when I was trying to get funding for this film, it seemed like the funders were only looking for the victim story, like women who had been affected by working inside the nail salon. So to approach the nail salon as a point of pride and to pivot into this whole narrative about what it is to be Vietnamese American wasn't intriguing to them at the time. They wanted, the lowdown story of what's really going on inside those nail salons. So it's interesting, you can explain all day long how your film is different, but if somebody kind of has the vision for how the nail salon narrative should be told, it's hard to argue for a film of empowerment, which I find this film to be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And how have you found the receptiveness since it's been streaming?
I love getting messages from people from all over the country, Vietnamese, who have family in the nail salon industry, and some really touching emails about the idea of representation that I was talking about earlier. There's something really powerful about seeing your history represented in film. And so a lot of beautiful responses. There is still class consciousness within the Vietnamese community that you know, a lot of people still don't want to be defined by the Vietnamese nail salon. I do wish that they would take time to watch the film, because I think that they'll come away really having a lot of pride in our resiliency and our grit to be able to open these nail salons across the country, like starting from California, and then look how many Vietnamese nail salons are all over the U.S., but also all over the world.
Absolutely.
France, Germany, England, back to Vietnam,
industry.
Czechoslovakia. I mean, yeah, that's just in the U.S. That's not global. So it's really touching the Vietnamese character in a way I haven't seen in film, because usually our stories are told within the context of the war, which of course we have to talk about. It's how we became American. But it's not everything about our culture and what Vietnamese America is going to represent in the next generation. Like for our kids, I don't know. I don't think that they're going to have the same relationship with being Vietnamese that I have, and you even more so, you know, because being born there and coming as a refugee, it does shape your experience in this country.
Absolutely. One thing that I wanted to ask you, I listened to your NPR interview last week. If you guys haven't heard it, you can find it online. Adele was amazing. But you did make one statement that I wanted to ask you about. You said Asian women and Black women are never shown in intimate spaces. And I know that the man trap was kind of a piece in the film that I really loved. So can you talk a little bit about that statement and the significance of man trap in this film?
Sure. I mean, mostly the relationships you see between Vietnamese nail salons and their Black customers is acrimonious in the media. But my bigger question was, well, how did those nail salons get there to begin with? So that was a question I was asking in the research and development phase. And man trap came to me because I asked the right question. And Mike Boa was like, oh, you know, my mother's first business partner is African-American woman, and Olivet is a dear friend of mine now. You know, she's really my favorite person from the film. Don't tell Kelvin. Oh, wait, we're on the podcast. Shoot. And there's also something sad about that relationship never being replicated. It's like the Vietnamese family just took the concept and it did spread like fire, but what did we lose? Because there was very little fighting within the man trap salons because there was a mutual respect set up from the ownership, right? So if there was an issue with the clients who are Black, Olivet is going to be able to put that one out fairly quickly. You know, there's no language barrier there. And even if she's not there, you know that this is a Black establishment, half owned by a Black person. And so I really want Vietnamese people to recognize that part of this nail game, a whole big part of this nail game, comes from Black culture. So some of our success is because we were accepted into these neighborhoods. This was a product that they wanted and that they paid for and that they're still paying for. So in the future, I would like to see more multicultural ownership scenarios happening inside the salon.
Yeah, I think that's what I love the most about it. It is just that entwine of the two different cultures coming together.
And women.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and they learn to trust each other. I know all the words. Yeah. They learn to trust each other through the trials that they went through. I mean, that's how a relationship is built.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Anybody have questions that you want to ask? Yes?
Definitely not mostly crowdsourced, although we did do an Indiegogo campaign. The Center for Asian American Media, Cal Humanities, they were my main funders. I applied several times. Asian Women's Giving Circle was very good in awarding me twice, and that's a little bit different funding model that I really respect. It's, you know, Asian women who are in finance and other lucrative professions who pool their money together to support projects. But again, there's just not enough money to support all of these great ideas. And I'd been making documentary films for a long time and other features, but working for other directors. So it can be hard to convince people that you're going to be able to finish a feature really without having it done. That's kind of what funders want in a way. So, yeah, we just don't fund the arts in this country. We don't, and it's disheartening, you know. It kind of makes documentary filmmaking more into like a gentleman's hobby than a profession, because you're constantly like hustling. So even when I'm not making my passion projects, I hate that, calling them that, you know, I'm still working in this industry to make money, and you can get fatigued by that, for sure. Yes.
Yes.
It hasn't quite hit documentary in the same way as narrative, but yeah, I mean, I worked on this film for so long that a lot's changed. Even using myself as the director, as narrator, that's more of a common way to approach a documentary than how I learned to make a documentary at the New School, for example. I've always inserted my voice into my films, and that was really shunned for a long time. Like, that hasn't changed till a few years ago at the most, you know? Yeah, so we just need to fund our own work, and I don't think anyone has figured out that model yet. If we want to be represented, we have to fund our own films.
Do you think that will change rapidly, though, because Asian American voices and films and stuff are just becoming more apparent?
I hope so, but I don't know if it's really in our culture to fund the arts.
In general.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Like, it has to come from our generation in partnership with the older generation, right? That's why I was talking about going to the Vietnamese pageant, right? Because I kind of want to interlope that whole scene, right? Vietnamese people will pay for what they want, but they don't know that they want this yet. They have to see it first. But once they see themselves represented, as long as they don't mind being represented as working class people, then, you know, it's a whole conversation. Mm-hmm. And I don't quite know how to harness that, but like I said, it's just a powerful thing to see your story represented, because we don't share our stories. There's so much trauma involved that we don't download our stories to other people. And it's really our generation that's kind of putting together the pieces and trying to figure out the deeper meaning. I don't know if you can get deeper than being a refugee, but trying to figure out what it all means, you know?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh, totally. I mean, even, you know, if you're coming out of communism, you're not trying to share the details of what your family was doing during the war. That's very learned. Even my own father doesn't tell me everything that happened. So Kelvin, he's a co-producer on the film, but he's been in the nail industry for so many years, and people gravitate towards him, trust him, and think he's funny. So he gave me the access that I needed to push the film in the direction, the personal direction that I wanted. Because, you know, people don't recognize me as Vietnamese. Even after I tell them, they're like, "What, do you speak?" I'm like, "No." I'm like, "Oh, you're not Vietnamese." Yeah, exactly. So documentaries about access and relationships that get you to the stories that are going to tell a deeper story.
Okay, we have time for one more question from the audience. Yes.
Maybe what's next?
Hate crimes. That's my next film. It's about hate crimes in Oregon, where I'm from. Another personal story entwines with that larger story about hate crimes and the history of exclusion laws that Oregon statehood was based on. It was created to be a white homeland state. And, you know, how does that translate in the 21st century when, you know, we're seeing white supremacy on the rise in an undeniable kind of way. And yeah, still working out the details of that, but there's a particular story, the murder of a teenager named Larnell Bruce Jr. by a white supremacist in 2016, when Trump's campaign was really starting to take off. And I went back to Oregon to cover that story, or the aftermath of that story. And then I just finished filming the murder trial, which was both satisfying and raised more questions about what hate crime laws actually are and if they work in a place like Oregon. Asians as well. There's a fairly unknown story about a Chinese massacre of gold miners in southern Oregon. So that's also part of the story that comes in before statehood, but informs these exclusion laws that specifically kept Black and brown people from being able to have citizenship in the state. Well, if you Google state of Oregon and field of vision, again, you can drop me a line on Instagram if you can't remember that. A short film detailing just the murder of Larnell Bruce Jr. was released in 2017. So, these documentaries take time, but also finding your stride takes time, and balancing all of these really atrocious hate crimes, but then also breaking the heaviness with some of that Portlandia levity. I mean, it really is weird there. So I'm just trying to strike the right balance and get my team together so it's not so much of a solitary journey, like applying for all these grants and getting pissed off because people don't understand your vision.
I think I saw one more hand in the back. Yes.
I think it had something to do with having a white mother, and it was just a different time. I don't think she necessarily wanted us speaking a language that she didn't understand, which sounds incredibly selfish in this day and age. Things have just changed so much. I mean, Tracy, like your own parents kind of wanted you to become Americanized.
Yeah. I think.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that was very common in the 80s and the 90s when Vietnamese refugees were just coming to the U.S. It was all about helping their child adapt to new country, new culture. And so they just wanted you to go out there and meet American. And it, you think back on it, it's kind of like just so sad at times because they would struggle to try to speak with you in English because they were also trying to learn the language. But it was all about wanting you to fit in. And I think, that could be part of what your dad might have.
He also wanted me to go to Vietnamese school straight up, and I didn't want to go.
Actually, I did too, yes.
But you also learn language from your mother. I mean, I see how I interact with my baby, and that's a very close relationship that I don't have, So that's why I'll always be outside the culture at the same time.
So I have one last question for you. Now that the film's made, and I know it was lots of years of love and hardship involved, can you tell us one thing that you felt you've really accomplished that you didn't expect to accomplish when you were making this film?
Yeah, I mean, just getting it done to the specification and the quality that I wanted to be. At a certain point, I just thought, man, I'm never going to get this money together. I don't have that uncle who's just going to front me the cash that it's going to take to get it through post-production even. So I'm just proud of that. Having it broadcast on PBS and just being able to reach a global audience through this film. I just did an interview with ABC Australia Radio last night. And, Australia has a booming Vietnamese nail salon industry. It's huge, right? So this is really a global story. I shot a ton of footage that didn't make it into this cut, but moving forward, I would like to make a film about the Vietnamese global diaspora through their nail salons.
Call us when you start that one.
Oh, girl, I'm already there. I'm like, oh, you're a nonprofit? Ooh, fiscal sponsorship? Ooh.
Thank you so much, Adele, for spending the night with us
Thank
this
you.
evening.